Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this first webinar for 2022. This first square table organized by the Nuria and the Isaka Netherlands chapter. Some housekeeping rules as always. Please mute your microphone at all time, unless you have a question. We reach out to you. You can ask them directly to our speaker. Most of them will be at the end of the session. We've noted that it's important if you register yourself that you register both your first name and your last name. Otherwise, we will not be able to know who you are, and your name will pop up as an unknown user. So we won't be able to assign your CP points. The presentation is recorded. We have our own YouTube channel. You can follow it, and we also will make sure that we'll share this link towards you afterwards. And today our speaker will be presenting how to set up a correct cybersecurity strategy. Her name is Alexander Wells. Thank you for being here in our webinar. So if you can introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Dwayne, for having me here for your first webinar of the year. So yes, I work at Group IB. I work in the Threat Intelligence and Attribution team. I've been working in security for about 10 years now, almost to the day. And I started in my native New Zealand as a product marketing manager there. I looked at house prices. They're not too dissimilar to what's going on here in the Netherlands. Thought an MBA might be a better investment for my money with what I had. So I went to the UK, where I picked up this accent and the love of drinking tea. And after I finished my MBA, I worked for a zero trust network access company for a few years. And since July last year, I've now been working at Group IB. So without further ado, I'll start presenting. Right, so thank you for the introduction. So today's topic is staying ahead of threat actors. I think one of the most common questions that CISOs get asked or security professionals in general is, where will the next attack be coming from? What tactics, techniques, and procedures will they use? And importantly, will our current security ecosystem defend against it? Now, the right answer can result in a really robust security strategy. Getting the answers wrong can result in a costly data breach, unmitigated fraud, and unnecessary expenditure. So today I'm going to be talking about several things. First, I'm going to be talking about how we can use a threat landscape to build a security strategy, and how getting relevant and actionable information is critical, how attributing the attacks to specific threat actors helps sort of create that actionable data, and how these threat landscapes then solve those strategic questions that you may have. We'll then go into how we can use threat intelligence to build this landscape. I'll be answering what it is, threat intelligence, and also importantly, how do we gather and then how do we share that intelligence? And finally, I'll go through a couple of high-level use cases which might work for you. And finally, I'll be sharing basically some best practice around building a business case for your security strategy. I've got a case study, basically how an analyst, Forrester Consulting, has built their business case, built business cases, how some top tips then for you to build your own business case. And I think also importantly, reminding your stakeholders that doing nothing is also a choice, and expecting the status quo isn't what's going to happen in cybersecurity. So without further ado, how can you use a threat landscape to build a security strategy? I'm a little bit of a sucker for a Sun Tzu quote. And I think this is I think it's a great analogy for cybersecurity. This is a battle. It's us against them. It's us trying to protect our assets, them trying to attack them. But if we only know half the information, we're leaving it to chance. If I'm building a wall around my city, well, what happens if they know how to tunnel under them? So we need to understand who they are, how they operate. So I think, you know, a good place to start is stats we've all heard before. 3/4 of CISOs say their organization has experienced an increase in attacks in the last 12 months. The average number of days to identify and contain a data breach is 287. Cyber attacks are the second most concerning risk for doing business globally. These are great stats. These are great headline stats. You know, I have to be honest, I use them in presentations myself because they're eye-catching. However, what can I do with these stats? You know, for me, you know, information should be relevant and actionable. It needs to be something which I can, you know, is specific to me and my needs, but then also allows me to then, you know, go ahead and do something. A stat is useless if you can't then use it to enforce a policy or create value. So we need to start by filtering information. What's relevant? And take all of the information out there. We then need to refine it by our geography, by our industry, by our organization size, the technology we use, who our partners are, and even our customers. And only then do we get to the information that we really care about. To give you a little bit of an example of, you know, just applying that first layer of filtering, you know, in comparison to those stats I shared before, here are some on ransomware which are filtered to Europe and the Netherlands. You know, Europe suffers the second most ransomware attacks of any region in 2021. The ransomware attacks on European organizations grew 84%. And the Netherlands specifically is ranked 11th globally out of every single country for the number of ransomware attacks. This is already information which is more relevant to myself as someone in the Netherlands. And phishing, which is another big cybersecurity topic. You know, 36.2% of all attacks for phishing occur in Europe, the most anywhere. The Netherlands, in particular, has nearly 4,000 phishing resources hosted in the country, and that's important because a lot of phishing attacks target the country that the resources are hosted in, and that makes sense because, you know, there'll be nuances around languages. You know, if you know that a certain retail organization is doing a promotion or a sale, you can, you know, emulate their brand and try and, you know, fool people into opening your phishing. And what I think is very important is last year in the Netherlands, we saw the emergence of phishing as a service. And if you know, ransomware as a service has, you know, led to the proliferation of ransomware around the world, where, you know, certain groups which produce and create the ransomware can then, you know, basically give that sort of really hard to create content to affiliates who can then launch massive attacks against lots of countries. So the fact that we're now seeing phishing as a service develop in the Netherlands means that we here can probably expect an increase in the number of attacks that we experience. All of these findings and more were actually released in our high-tech crime trends reports, which we released in December last year, and I highly recommend you go and have a look at them because there's lots of information which you can, you know, again, begin to utilize within your organization, because we have information broken down by region and industry and other factors. I talked about information also being actionable, and the key way that we at Group AB make information actionable is by working out where did the attacks come from. And they don't come from nowhere, they don't spontaneously sort of develop. You know, the reality is that cybercrime is profitable. There are groups which can, you know, make hundreds of thousands per month. And, you know, these are career criminals. And, you know, these people, like all of us, have behaviors and patterns and habits. They will, you know, if you make a presentation deck, you will reuse it and slides within it all again and again. And the same way they will reuse infrastructure. If they've developed a botnet network, they will use it for multiple attacks. If they've developed some ransomware, they'll again use that for multiple attacks. At Group IB, we've even actually started grouping malware into malware families, and we can track the evolution of this malicious software over time. And much like a virus today, in the medical field, which has specific protein strains, and we can identify and sort of track and block and hopefully develop immunity based on those. We can do the same thing for malware families, where we can see these same elements are remaining the same, so we can easily block that strain by doing some clever things, by understanding that these attacks start with people. To give you an example, so I thought I would share another extract from our high-tech crime report. So again, this is on the Netherlands, and here we can see the Rungear phishing group and how they conduct their attacks. So they send an SMS to the victim via it can either be via the SMS network or via WhatsApp. People will then attempt to open it on their smartphone, and actually built a rather clever piece of software to try and block security researchers. That security researchers quite often use desktop and laptop devices to scan through and run through lots of URLs. So what they do is they say, is this coming from a mobile network or from a fixed line ISP? If it's coming from the mobile network, then chances are it's a real person who will show them the phishing site. And if not, we'll just block it. And so we can understand how these groups are thinking and work around them. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see, we've identified 750 domains that they use. We can see the tool sets and the procedures that they're using, so we can tailor our defenses. We can block those domains and our content filters and our firewalls, and we can also set up threat hunting rules in our EDR or a mobile threat defense system to try and identify signs of these phishing attacks and stop them before they cause damage. And this is, I think, the power of firstly making information relevant and then making it actionable. A simpler example, and a way that I love to describe, attributing stuff is, if you live on a street and in the last month, 5 houses have been broken into, chances are it's going to happen again. And that's information which is relevant to you. You can see it happening in your neighborhood. If you then also know that whoever's doing it is breaking in via the windows, I need to invest in making my window frames more secure. There's no need for me to invest in a stronger door, because they're not trying to break in that way. They're trying to break in via the windows. And I think that's a great example of just how we can use this information, and how we can also explain it to our CISOs and our board of directors who might need help with some of these concepts. Now, the challenge is, of course, that every threat actor targets different victims, and every threat actor uses different tactics, techniques, and procedures. The challenge for us is, which threat actors should I monitor to protect my business? And this is where building a threat landscape comes in. And your threat landscape should aim to answer sort of 6 questions. Who are the threat actors targeting my organization today? Which are the things I need to be looking out for? What are those threat actors trying to do? Are they trying to get access to intellectual property? Are they trying to get a hold of personnel or customer personal details? Or are they trying to, steal payment card information to commit fraud? Very akin to that is, what technologies are they, targeting? Quite often people have very specific knowledge sets. We recently did a piece of work with a law enforcement agency with a threat actor who specifically targeted financial organizations which had SMS servers. And there aren't a lot of financial organizations which have SMS systems, integrated into their backend. So, these are incredibly specific attacks which are occurring. What are the emerging threats in my industry? Again, that analogy of, the street I live on. If someone's, hit Nike, Adidas, and whoever else in the retail shoe business, and I'm next, could I be next? Who poses a threat to the industry in different regions? Quite often we see attack structures develop in particular regions and then slowly migrate. I mentioned phishing, as being one of the biggest things in the Netherlands, but phishing as a trend really started in Russia. And what we're seeing now, and especially saw last year, was a migration towards APAC. And it's not people leaving and no longer targeting Europe, but actually, threat actors in those regions picking up those techniques and implementing themselves. And finally, which adversaries have expressed interest in my organization in the past? This might be, on the dark web, who's been talking about my organization, who's been discussing it on, threat actor channels. And the answers, conveniently, can be found in threat intelligence. Now, I'll explain how to use threat intelligence and how to understand your threat landscape and the value it can provide. So Gartner describes basically as, it's not trends, it's not predictions, it's not analysts' guesswork, it's evidence-based knowledge, and it's across several domains, context, mechanisms, indicators, that, and it's used to inform decision making. Now, the reason that threat intelligence, I think, is valuable is because the way we've traditionally thought about security, cybersecurity, is we've built a perimeter, and as security professionals, we monitor and we make sure that everything inside that perimeter is safe, or we try to. The problem is that if we see an attack within our perimeter, if we see something happening, it's potentially already too late. It's already in the network. It's potentially already causing damage, or worse, the attack happened a month ago and we're only finding out about it now. What threat intelligence is doing is it's looking at what's going on outside the perimeter, so you can predict what's coming. It's a little bit like using a weather forecast. You don't wait to see rain dripping through your ceiling. You look at the weather reports. You see a storm coming. You see the category whatever winds, and you say, you know what? I'm going to make sure my house is secure against this. What are the experts saying? So I've given you a couple Gartner quotes. I think Gartner have had a market guide for the last 10 years. So it's definitely not a new technology. And as Frost and Sullivan says here, the need is growing because the sophistication and volume of attacks is increasing year on year. Accenture, so we can get this visibility, we can get an understanding of these attacks through threat intelligence. And finally, PwC saying organizations which have begun using threat intelligence say that it makes a difference to them, and they're more likely to say it's integral to their operating model. So these are some compelling quotes from sort of technology analysts and industry leaders. Raises the important question: how do we gather threat intelligence? I said it's the sort of combination of everything which is occurring outside your perimeter, but how do we go about this? There are sort of open source feeds of intelligence which you can get for free, but those will be missing pieces of the puzzle. And to be fully aware of what's going on, you need to have a 360-degree view of what's happening. And we at GrowHobby think about it as sort of 6 domains. Firstly, human intelligence. You need to have people, infiltrating those hacker communities. being a part of those conversations, pretending to be malicious. You need to have, malware intelligence, unpacking, understanding, deciphering how malware works so that you can come up with ways of blocking, identifying, and preventing it. Having a sensor network, so honeypots, spam traps, sinkholing, so that you can capture those bits of information. Data intelligence, so this is intercepting, deciphering information which has been sent to and from CNC servers, or monitoring card shops which share payment information. Of course, open source intelligence, things like page sites, code repositories like GitHub, vulnerabilities like the MITRE site, very, very useful. And finally, investigations. These attacks are occurring to real organizations, and you should expect threat intelligence of what happened to this organization, because the majority of organizations will never admit that they had an attack. And so, even if an investigation does occur, they'll never publicly admit it. And this means that there's a potential for a lot of insights to get lost. So I think having a threat intelligence which incorporates, what's happening, what pieces of malware discovered, what were the indicators of network compromise, and these other things are really important to the overall picture that you're trying to build. So once threat intelligence has been gathered, it is then, as I said, filtered and attributed to make it relevant and actionable. And I think it can then fall into three categories: so strategic, operational, and tactical. The first is for security leaders and executives. And I'm not saying that they only will be interested in reports, but I think it's a good way that they can easily pick up and understand and disseminate the sorts of things that they're interested in. It can be used for making smarter risk management decisions, driving business growth in a secure manner, and also, getting the most out of security investments that they've already made. Secondly, it's operational. Team leaders, SOC engineers, people who are monitoring and looking after the overall environment. And this could be those tools, techniques, and procedures. In the MITRE attack matrix. And if you're not familiar with the MITRE attack matrix, it's sort of the end-to-end, it gives the language for describing the end-to-end attacks that threat actors use. And it's particularly powerful because if we understand the kill chain that is used, and we see something in one spot, we can then sort of say, if I see this, let me look up and down the chain to see if I can, see other signs of attack. There are also security integrations. You want to be integrating this into your workflows, into your other platforms to, improve efficiency. And you want to be, as I said, using this information about how they attack to identify and remove your own weaknesses. And, finally, there's that sort of on-the-ground security analyst, threat engineer, access to the entire sort of IOC database for groups which are attacking them. And, they use this to say, we should be priority because people are attacking this thing. Or, we don't care about these false positive, we don't care about these events because, high chance they're a false positive, which means they can respond faster to the threats that matter. So I'll just quickly go through sort of some of the strategic use cases that I described. So the first is risk management. So it's it's not possible to patch every software application. The number of organizations which I've worked with who try and remain no more than one update behind is it's a valiant effort, but the reality is technology ecosystems are made of hundreds of different services. And, if anything, the log4j vulnerability, which was discovered, shows, just how fast spread some vulnerabilities can be and how difficult it can be to work through every single thing to try and fix it. But the reality is, if critical vulnerabilities go unpatched, threat actors will pay attention to it. These are, to be gracious, they're entrepreneurs. They're going to go for the easiest target, which gives the most return. And if you have a vulnerability which is left unpatched, they'll target it. So threat intelligence allows organizations to anticipate threats. Organizations can monitor what vulnerabilities are being exploited, which ones are actively, being seen in the wild. See whether it's being targeted against their industry. If someone's targeting airlines with a certain vulnerability, but you work in, industrial goods, maybe it isn't the biggest deal that you patch that immediately. Maybe you can focus on something else. And you can even, if you're monitoring the dark web, see which threats or which vulnerability people are talking about, so you can anticipate, they might start exploiting this one. They haven't yet, but they might. And I think, this is a great quote from Gartner, don't try and patch everything. Use threat intelligence to, look at threat actor activity, review your own sort of risk, and then decide what to go about doing. The second case study that I'd like to share is, enabling business growth. Many businesses, with a growth mindset are thinking about how they can expand into a new region or a new business line. And by doing so, they could attract new threat actors who are utilizing different techniques, which their organization isn't prepared for. Similarly, digital transformation. If you're looking at making services, digitizing services, and particularly making them available to customers and partners externally, that could expose business infrastructure, which, if you're not prepared for, could be used against you. So the solution is, threat intelligence allows security teams to, investigate the threat actors which are targeting them, their regions, or their industry, and, conduct, risk assessments. If you're thinking about integrating or using a certain vendor or partner for your technology, you can do a review. How many vulnerabilities have there been found in the last year? How many exploits have been, utilized against people in my industry? And, these aren't, business growth and cybersecurity are becoming more and more entangled. Gartner predicts that 40% of board directors will have a dedicated cybersecurity by 2025. Cybersecurity isn't, it's not siloed. It's becoming more and more essential to strategic business decision making, and trying to work with the business to help them anticipate and prevent threats is, I think, one of our core goals. And finally, maximizing investment value from sort of existing cybersecurity investments. Every company has a limited budget, and many tools will provide a benefit. But which ones do we select, and which ones will provide the most benefit? Threat intelligence helps organizations, avoid unnecessary, security investments. Do I need to invest in a new firewall solution if most of the attacks are against my remote access VPN? So, again, where do I need to spend my money? Which will provide, the greatest benefits? And, real-time intelligence allows, us to configure our tools to, best defend against attacks and, get the most out of what we've already invested in. And, cybersecurity growth is slowing. And I think this is, another key use case for using threat intelligence to build our business cases. I've heard from quite a few CISOs that, they're told before you, bring in a security tool in, you need to get rid of 2. So it's, it's a challenge. We've invested a lot in cybersecurity, show us the value. And I think, threat intelligence can help get improve that value for what you've already invested in. So we've gone about identifying what our threat landscape is. We've sort of thought about the use cases and how we can sort of use them to identify opportunities and business value. And now we'll sort of look at sort of how we can use this information to build a business case and sort of some best practice. So, I said Forrester Consulting is the case study we've got. And, Forrester Consulting, like Gartner, IDC, and other sort of expert groups, their job is to review and evaluate technology. And so they've built a framework called the Total Economic Impact Analysis, which I think is a great example, and a great template that we can use, in creating our own business cases to take to our board to sort of say, okay, I've come up with a great strategy. Here's why we should do it. So the total economic impact analysis it goes beyond sort of total cost of ownership and other things, because total cost of impact really is just looking at a very small part of the puzzle. There's also sort of the business impact. What value does it provide back to me? There's also risk, what are ways that this project could fail? But then also, what are the requirements to minimize that risk? And also, what are the long-term outcomes? Where are we going as a company? How can I do today help set us up for success in the future? The sort of IT costs. So this is probably the easiest thing to evaluate. It's quite straightforward, really. It's who are the vendor? What are the upfront costs? What do I need to buy? Is there technology of physical appliance? And then are there any annual subscription costs? Very common with cloud services. Then implementation. How much does it cost for me to install? Get it working with all of the other technologies, and then also, if I'm integrating this with other things in my ecosystem, do they need to be sort of upgraded to a certain level? And finally, human, how many people will it take to manage and use this service? Do they require training? Will there be an ongoing sort of cost to, keep up this level? And that's probably the easy bit. The harder bit is evaluating benefits. So Gartner predicts that 60% of CISOs will establish critical partnerships. And, I said, security is no longer siloed. We need to, be working with other parts of the organization to, help fix the problems. In the case study that we'll be going into, some of the value was calculated by working with other organizations. For example, payment cards. If someone is committing fraud, the cost isn't just the amount of money that they stole. It's potentially the customer experience cost. They will be on the phone for a couple of hours to my customer experience team, so I have to pay that cost for that person's salary. There's potentially, if it's a really bad attack, that person may leave my, company and go somewhere else. If I work in the retail industry and I launch, a new promotion and someone starts a phishing attack, well, that could be me losing revenue because I was expecting, people to be coming to my site to buy my products, but instead they were getting scammed and phished by another site. And so working with marketing teams, customer experience teams, building these partnerships can help you find value where what's going to be the outcomes. So this is a bit of a scary stat from McKinsey, but the reality is a lot of IT projects run over time and don't produce the value that was expected. And into your predictions to be conservative and to try and create something which will align with what's going on. And finally, long-term outcomes. Cybersecurity is a business risk. Not every sort of benefit is quantifiable. So you should be, again, working with, okay, what's my company trying to do? Are we digitizing? Are we trying to, remain the lowest price option? How are we differentiating? How are we staying ahead of our competition? So to go into sort of a very brief case today, economic impact reports looked at a financial services industry company, which also is investment banking. It's a $100 billion company with over 100,000 employees in Europe. And they were struggling with fraud. It was damaging that customer experience that I talked about. And that was creating, a lot of complexity as they tried to stay on top of them, remediate, minimize the fraud, but they were struggling. And, the estimated cost of business was substantial, with an estimated 20,000 payment cards compromised per year with $600 of loss, 12 million USD in losses per year. Just calculating the impact and how we can, mitigate these losses. I think it's best to stay simple here. The more complexity you add, the more chance that you introduce assumptions which are incorrect. Oh, sorry, am I? Hopefully that's a little clearer for you. So, in this example, what's the total amount of fraud? How much do we think we can prevent? What's the average loss per card? And so as a very simple calculation, if it's 20,000 per year, we'll take a quarter of it. If it's 600, we'll take, and we'll then take 80% of that total, amount of loss we can prevent and say, 80% is probably, realistic. And in this way, we can be conservative and present numbers which we think that we'll achieve. And then once we've created and gathered all of these, so we've created our business case, we've mapped it all out. There are a couple different ways that we can present this information. So I've got some of the key ones here in your business cases. Firstly, return on investment. This is for every dollar spent, how much will I get back? If I spend $1 in this case, I'm getting, €1. In this case, I'm getting €3.39 in return. If I spend 770K over the course of 3 years, I will generate 3.4 million in total benefits. And this results in a total net present value of 2.6 million. We use present value, and I recommend you use present value because a dollar tomorrow is worth less today. A sort of good rule of thumb for technology investments is to use a 10% is to use amortization sort of number to sort of say, okay, if something's worth €1.1 next year, that's equivalent of, if something's worth €1, apologies. If I've €1 next year is worth 1.1 euros this year, and conversely, or rather, sorry, I've lost it. And finally, right down at the bottom, 250,000 in OPEX savings. So this is not value added, but it's budget saved. If organizations often, get stretched with maintaining workflows, systems, tools, and if you can say, we can reallocate that budget somewhere else, or even just save it and use that to increase our profit margin, then that's a good business outcome. Now, as I said, there are risks. There are those long-term outcomes, and you can't always quantify and predict them. So I would always sort of look to add additional benefits or risks and be noting them down as ways of sort of supporting a business case. And, I think with security, you're not sort of asking someone to say yes or no on something. You're giving them the scenario of, do you invest? Do you not invest? It's not a yes, no, it's I'm going down pathway 1, pathway 2. There's no standing still. Business risks change. Historical threats and events shouldn't impact today's thinking. Just because we were safe for the last 5 years doesn't mean that we're going to be safe next year. And with that, I think the key points to summarize are to have an effective security strategy, you need to understand the threat landscape, where attacks coming from, and how do you stop them. Build a detailed and up-to-date threat landscape using threat intelligence. Look across all those different domains of intelligence and look at distributing and disseminating it across all of the teams so you can understand what's going on. And finally, use a total to action that strategy. And one last Sun Tzu quote for you. It's an enlightened ruler and a wise general who uses the highest intelligence of the army for the purpose of spying and thereby they can achieve great results. If you know your adversaries, you understand how they operate, what they're trying to do, then you are in the best position to counter them. And with that, thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Alexandra, for your presentation. So now we open for any questions, whether you can raise your hand virtually and then I'll call your name, or you can put the questions on the chat and then I will help to moderate. While waiting, maybe I can start with my own question, Alexandra. So what do you think, let's say, if I'm a small, medium enterprise with, less budget, even to do this threat intelligence, is there any, let's say, quick / good bang for the buck if I want to use threat intelligence in some way? Because even to get the threat intelligence into place, sometimes it's a challenge from a budget point of view for small, medium companies.
Yeah, so threat intelligence traditionally has been mostly used by large organizations with very well-established security teams. We are seeing that sort of change over time as more awareness and understanding of the value it provides, is seen by medium and small businesses. However, I think for smaller organizations, the best place to start is perhaps doing attack service management. This is just looking at what assets do you have which are internet facing. A lot of smaller, medium-sized businesses will, they'll purchase software and technology without necessarily going through the procurement processes that a larger company will go through. And as a result, they can have cloud services which the technology team don't realize because someone in marketing has gone with a credit card and signed up to XYZ service, or someone in accounting has signed up for some cloud-based accounting software. So yeah, starting with attack service management, this doesn't have to be a software product, service. This could actually just be an internal audit, going around the team leaders, going around the stakeholders, and finding out which services they use. Have those been vetted? Have those been approved? And starting there, so you're aware of all of the ways that your business touches the internet.
Clear. Thank you very much. So we have a question from Peter Stoffin. Please unmute yourself and ask your question directly.
Okay, great presentation. Thank you for that. I work for Philips. We have a threat intelligence discipline. I was wondering how you would typically bring threat intel to business leaders to make it into, let's say, actionable information for them.
Yeah, so I think security and sort of risk management are sort of they're increasing in terms of the amount of awareness. A lot of sort of executives and board members understand that it's important. They don't necessarily understand how to interpret, that information. A good place to start, I think, is by sort of sharing those quarterly updates. What has happened? How are things going? What's changing? Because it's much like a competitive landscape, which they're probably more familiar with. It's not the company existing in a void. There are other people out there, adversaries, who are changing what they do, and it's not necessarily about understanding the details, but it's about sort of understanding that context. And I think a large way that you can build trust between yourself as a security professional with executives is advising when investment isn't needed. Executives and board members are very used to technology teams as a whole in wanting more money to do more things. And I think, threat intelligence, we can say, this isn't something that we need. What we need is over here. Yes, I'd start with those high-level quarterly sort of insights and reports, or monthly, depending on how often the board meets, and really be trying to guide them on what's changed and what it means for the business.
Okay, thank you for your feedback.
Thank you, Peter, for the question. Anyone else? I'm trying to scan the chat. No new question. Okay. Again, maybe while waiting for a new question from our participant, I have another one. It's also related to the previous questions about bringing the message to the board. Does it have to be like a threat intelligence, let's say, information by itself, like as a standalone update, standalone changes, or we always have to kind of like tweak it, so not just like copy paste the message directly from the report and then send it to the board, or we always need to put that in the context of our own organization. So the risk manager, the threat intel team is also the one who needs to kind of like curate the information.
So great question. So firstly, when setting up a threat intelligence service, a lot of sort of due diligence should be done up front to go about filtering that information. If you think about sort of a major challenge that SOC teams have, security operations centers have, is they get so many alerts, they don't know which to look at first. And it's the same with threat intelligence. If you don't have those initial filters built into your threat intelligence platform, well, you're going to end up with so many different insights coming at you from so many different angles, you won't know what to begin analyzing. So first, I would always recommend, make sure your threat intelligence service is configured for your organization. So industry, region, size are three of the biggest and most important metrics. But then also be monitoring, who are my partners. If you work in manufacturing, supply chain risks. If someone upstream from me gets disrupted, what could that mean? For my operational uptime. If I lose the ability to get new screws, how many products will I, not be able to manufacture? And yeah, secondly, it's going to be up to your teams, and perhaps I think be highlighting whichever you think is the most relevant threat. We talked about sort of risk and uncertainty and those long-term objectives. Those aren't things which you can enter into a sort of a Boolean string to create a filter. You need to, once you've got that filtered information, say, okay, well, actually these ones align to what we're trying to do. The board says that they want to, as I said, look at a new region or introduce a new product line, or they want to create a partner portal or open up an API for, some integration with, another service provider. Well, those are, sort of bits of human intelligence, human filtering that your team can do to really help categorize and highlight things to the board.
Okay, clear. Thank you. By the way, we have questions over the chat from Yolanda. Would you like to ask your question directly, or shall I basically read the question?
Oh, I can ask it. Hi.
Cool.
I have a question. Now, we talked about these attacks in Europe 2021, according to the research which you shared, it grew about 84% with ransomware attacks. Now, I'm interested in this, as you were looking at the business case, has there been also analysis on your side what the average spend is and what drives the average spend for companies on in this area? Because I would expect maybe the type of industry like finance, there would be a higher, as it so depends on IT, there would be a higher spend than other industries. Or is it also the number of employees? I'm just interested, what's the driver here?
So are you asking what are the biggest factors in determining security spend, and are those driven by those sort of external attacks?
I would be interested, what has so far been the driver for the budget? Because if you build a business case, it's always good to know what's the average being spent in my industry, and have some a comparison. It will make it easier to share with your board, like this is the average we typically spend, that we are underspending in our company. Then maybe something we may need to do. I can imagine that's one of the thought process going through your head if you're in IT.
Oh, yes, of course. I understand your question. Thank you for elaborating. So it's not research that we've done at Group IB. However, that research exists. One of the largest expenditures per seat is the financial industry. And if you think about why that would be, it's because their assets are money, and so they're a big target for that reason. Another industry which is very high up on the list is healthcare, and that again makes sense because they've got a lot of confidential personal information, and with attacks like the name escapes me, but against the NHS in the UK in 2016, healthcare organisations are very aware of, the value and the target they have. So the largest driver tends to be, what the value of the assets that we have for their financial companies. It's the payment card information. It's the funds which they look after. For healthcare, it's that's personal information. So I think it's assessing the assets that you have, and that's what tends to drive expenditure. As I said, we don't have that we don't do that analysis at Group IB. However, you can find reports, and I think I might be able to even share one with you if you get in contact after the webinar.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other questions as of now. So I guess we can call off this evening. So once again, thank you very much, Alexandra, for your time, for your presentation, and for all the participants. Thank you very much for your time attending our webinar this evening. So just a reminder, next week we don't have a webinar, but we will continue the week after. So 2nd of February, Jan van Praat will do a webinar again on the 2nd of February, so not next week. Having said that, have a nice evening and see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.